Sisters in some pain that you don't seem to be able to create any hot cross buns, I thought I would just talk you through some of the key stages of making them. I'm making my third batch for the year, so I have certain things prepared. I'm going to go out of sight so that you can see the table now. And so I have my flours and spices all there, and salt. I'm actually using 1 cup of what's called half rough flour here, mainly because I bought it to experiment. It's the flour that's used for most Czech bakery, to be honest, and I thought I'd give it a try, never having used it. I'm not sure it's right, basically, but anyway, there we go. So that's 3 cups of plain flour and 1 cup of this polodruba. I'm going to activate my yeast. So I have my yeast in the bowl with a tiny bit of sugar, like less than a teaspoon of sugar. I'm putting the water in, which is half of the amount. It's sort of it's warm, and hopefully while I do the rest, it will start to activate. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a stir here. But with a bit of sugar, it should actually activate and start bubbling. And I think this is a better thing to do than what Hall used to tell us to do. So I have my flours. Now I need my sugar. Oops, right, how much sugar do I need? Yes, 3 tablespoons of sugar. I'm not sure that's quite enough. It's actually quite a lot of flour. I'm putting in about 1/3 of a cup of sugar, maybe a tiny bit more. There we go. Tiny weeny bit more than 1/3 of a cup of sugar. It's going into that well there. I do not use ascorbic acid, partly because I don't have it, and I seem to recall that Hall's justification was that it sped up the process of the yeast. Now I'm putting in my fruit, because you can't buy mixed fruit here. I've got a mixture of raisins and currants, and I've just warmed them up. I've just put them for a couple of minutes in the tiniest bit of water to soften them, because one thing I've discovered over here, or rather in the UK, is that the fruit is always beautifully soft, and I don't think doing it straight from the packet, certainly over here, means that the fruit is soft enough. Now I've had to buy my peel separately, so I'll put in a goodly amount of peel. What else am I going to use it for? I have to say it's more candy than peel. And it's more sort of, it doesn't really taste terribly citrusy. So I've got all my fruit in there. My yeast is starting to show signs of activity. Back again, and the yeast is now activating very nicely. You can see there it's bubbling, so it's clearly, you know, multiplying, and if I let it go much longer, it will really start to bubble quite significantly. So I'm going to now add all the liquid elements into my flour stuff. Now you will have noticed I did not rub in the butter as per Hall's recipe. This is partly because I found it quite difficult with my hand when I did the first batch, and you know, didn't really have the patience to go right to the end. It's not that much butter, it's a lot of flour, and it's a lot of fine movement, which I'm actually finding quite difficult. I can no longer open bottles and jars. Shipman has to do that. So I've melted it, and that's what lots of recipes ask anyway. So it's melted. In it goes, and that has an advantage too, because it helps to keep the dough warm. You know, it's only just sort of tepid, to be honest. There. Now there's my condensed milk, or rather my evaporated milk. So that's going to go in. This is the Czech version thereof. Good 1/3 of a cup. I've discovered that the reason that there's this evaporated milk, in fact most UK recipes don't have evaporated milk, they have normal milk, but you have to scald it. There's something to do with the milk and the yeast activation, that if you don't scald it, it's a problem. And so I think the evaporated milk already has more or less that process. So that's my yeast going in. I think actually having it activated is a good idea, because then you know it's activated rather than, you know, you can have to wait hours. I'm just going to wash my fingers. So now I've got a good slop there. I'm just going to mix it all up basically, and I've got more liquid because I've only got about half the liquid I needed in with the yeast. So I've just got that sitting there. You don't want it to be too wet. I'm sort of working that flour in, but you don't want it to be too dry either. So just playing it by ear here a bit more water, I think. The thing is, it picks up obviously quite a lot of flour as you're kneading it, so better to start off a little bit wet, I think. I don't know whether that's a good bun making principle or not, but it's the principle I'm applying, because if you've got a hard dough to start with, you can't really add it later, but you don't want it to be too wet. So that's sort of looking okay there, I think. Pull off the edges. Make sure I've got the flour from the bowl. Right, so it's about that. And I'm going to now put it out onto the floured board, which is of course the table to knead. Tricky bit. Now the way I'm going to do it today is a bit of an experiment. Once I've kneaded it, I'm then going to leave it for at least an hour to do a part rise. Then I'm going to knock it down and make the buns, and then I'm going to leave them to rise at room temperature. This is not, of course, what Faye Hall said, but I'm going to give it a go and see how that works as an alternative, because doing it the other way is frankly very difficult here, because I don't have a proper separate warm space. So I'm not going to bore you with 10 minutes of kneading while I get this together, but that's really me off and running with the dough. So here I am, sort of halfway through the knead. It's all come together rather nicely, but you do have to give it a good bit of welly, you know. And you've got to keep going. You've really got to keep going, because it's all about stretching. It's all about stretching. And the fruit pops out and God knows what. Incidentally, I have to keep adding flour. Incidentally, I'm going to actually make these a little bit different than the others by adding apple. The type of hot cross bun I really love in the UK is an apple hot cross bun. And I've been reading how to do it. I could have added apples cut up finely with the dried fruit, but I've decided to do it at the point I make the little buns, because you know, you cut it up into small amounts, and at that point you can just sort of knead in some apple. So I shall do that at that point. So I think I'm at the stage where I want to rest my dough. It's sort of reasonable. It's not, you know, it's supposed to bounce up a tiny little bit with your finger. It's reasonably shiny. It's not absolutely smooth. But anyway, I'm going to put a little bit of flour in my bowl here so it doesn't stick. And then I'm going to put it in. And then I'm going to cover it with a damp tea towel. Again, this is all new. I don't normally do this. I'm covering it with a damp tea towel because I read that it needs humidity. It needs the right humidity to rise. So I'm going to leave it at room temperature with a damp tea towel over it, and I'll come back and let you know how long it took to sort of double in size. Okay, so I'm taking the dough out from under the tea towel. It's been resting. It's not double in size, but I can feel that it's it's risen a bit, certainly. And I've decided, instead of making 16 buns, I'm going to make 20 this time because they're quite large. And so I'm going to weigh my dough. We weigh stuff in this household. We weigh pasta before having dinner. This is Stepan's little thing. Stepan even weighs the parmesan that he grates. It's all a bit, you know. 1375 grams I have there. So, God, what's 1375 grams divided by 20? 1375. Sue would have this immediately, obviously. About 69. 69 grams each. This helps if they're roughly the right size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bun and I'm going to sort of shove in some apple into it like that, and I'm going to knead it in as I make the bun. And this is what one recipe I saw for apple cross buns suggested kneading it in. In fact, I found one recipe that suggested kneading the fruit in at a later point. So to kind of knead the basic dough without the fruit and then add the dried fruit later. So I've done that and I've made a nice little bun. Now, more or less, there's no dried fruit showing. You really don't want dried fruit on the surface. You want any fruit covered with the tiniest, thinnest little bit of dough. Otherwise it burns. It's just nasty. So make a little bun. There we go. And put it on the thing and off I go. I have to just keep remembering that I've got 20 that I'm doing this time. So I'll come back when I've done my 20. So I'm going to give you a closer look at how I'm doing these little apple things. You can see I've got a tray done there at the moment, and so I'm taking my little bit of dough, sort of flattening it out a bit, putting some apple in the middle, not too much because I find that it will only take a certain amount. My little dough balls are about 65 grams each. If I put too much apple in, I'm finding it won't sort of, it's very difficult for me to get the bun to a point where the top is fairly clean of raisins. So that's what I want. I want the top fairly clean of raisins. So that's where I am. So I've got 5 more to do, and I've prepared more apple than I need. But, you know, this is trial and error. I've never done it with apple before. Okay, so I've got my tray of 20, and I can see the first one's already starting to rise. Now, this time I am not going to put them in a warm place. I'm going to do this at room temperature. I'm going to cover them in this damp tea towel again, bearing in mind what I've read about humidity. You see, I'm such a pain. I'm a bit of a researcher when it comes to these things. I want to know what the principles are. So I need something to keep the towel, so I don't want the towel resting on it. Maybe that's it. And I still have this amount of apple left to gobble for lunch, which is quite nice. So that's going to stay there for hours. It's now just gone midday, and we'll have our lunch, go out for a long walk, and I should have a little quick look at them again to see the size. Okay. I'm very interested. Well, I've returned early from our walk because I didn't want them to prove longer than about, 3 hours, because I put them there at 12:08. Now, the arrangement is slightly different to as we left it. I had left it with a towel over it, but I realised that actually the towel was probably going to be a bit heavy. So I used a box which I'd actually had it upside down when I was proving the other day, with a couple of little tea light candles underneath to create the little warm space. That was so difficult to manage because, oh God, trying to keep the heat in, trying to manage this box over a big tray of buns with tea light candles, about 3 of them. I had wax everywhere at one point, not to mention the possibility of the whole thing burning. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to try the slow prove. But I didn't want the weight of the wet tea towel on it, so I put the tray in the box and stuffed up the big holes of the box with these plastic bags. Not fully, but just to try to keep it a bit more steady. So it's just my box that I normally take a decorated cake to the hole to eat with. So here they are, proved. I think they're okay because I made 20. They're obviously smaller. So I now very quickly have to put the crosses on them and get them in the oven. I hope they're fully proved. And of course they've got apple. So I don't quite know. As Stepan said, I introduced 2 new variables this time, which was probably not a good idea, because then I won't know whether the proving method, how it went on its own, as opposed to the effect the apples might have on it. They will rise a tiny bit again once they go in the oven. I can see them flopping down a bit before my eyes. So these are going in the oven, which is at about 200. So here are my buns out of the oven. You can see some apple poking out here and there. They're, yes, I was hoping they might be a tiny bit bigger, but they're okay. But I have to remember, of course, that I divided the mixture up into 20, not 16. So I'm going to put the glaze on. Ooh, it's a bit sort of jelly-like. And later enjoy one. Actually, I'll probably have one while they're still warm. Yum, yum. Right, so it's the taste test. I'm going to pull out this one here on the corner. So they've only been out of the oven 5-10 minutes. I wanted to have it while it's nice and warm. Okay, so it's nice and soft. Very nice and soft. I like a bit of butter. This is unsalted butter. Oh, I can see the pieces of apple there. See the apple in there? There. I'm just very interested to see how this goes. I generally have the top without any honey, but I put a bit of honey on the bottom. But as this is jableczny, apple-y, maybe not. Maybe no honey. Well, I think they're nice. They're a bit smaller, but I divided it up into 20. What am I to expect? They look less even on the top, but that's because of obviously the apple's poking through, and I assume the apple does something a little bit to the dough. But otherwise, yum yum. Well, I hope yours work out too. Bye.